Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Well, this time last week, we were all receiving the depressing news of the death of the Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, in a penitentiary 1,900 kilometers from Moscow, deep inside the Arctic circle called Polar Wolf. And for the time being, the circumstances surrounding Navalny's death remain unclear. His corpse has not yet been returned to his family. The Russians are claiming to be carrying out an investigation, but we are not yet clear that this death was really from natural causes. And we can continue to suspect foul play, particularly when we consider the way in which Putin, over the years, has eliminated so many of his political opponents, or tried to eliminate them by sending his agents abroad with assassination squads and imprisoning many of them in terrible conditions in Moscow or elsewhere, which inevitably has led to their deaths. But nonetheless, even if it was not totally unexpected, the death of Navalny comes as a great shock. And if it were to be a political assassination, it inevitably reminds me of former very prominent political assassinations, which marked a moment when repressive regimes were turning into outright thuggish, brutal, and totalitarian regimes. For example, the assassination of Giacomo Matteotti, the leader of the Italian socialists in Rome in 1924, marking the moment when Mussolini's Italy moved from a parliamentary democracy to an outright fascist corporatist state, or Hitler's celebrated Night of the Long Knives in June 1934, when he eliminated all of his opponents in the Nazi Party, whether on the left or on the right. The assassination of the Leningrad Communist Party leader Sergei Kirov in 1934, together with the show trials of people like Nikolai Bukharin or Gregory Zinoviev, marking the moment when Stalin pulled free of his potential rivals in the Communist Party and assumed absolute and totalitarian power as well. Navalny seemed, at least for a while, to lead a charmed life. He survived two poisoning attempts, three incarcerations. One of the poisoning attempts was by the deadly Novichok nerve agent at Tomsk in Siberia in 2020, when he received medical treatment in Germany. He survived that and volunteered to go back to Russia in January 2021, knowing, I suppose, that despite the inevitability of being imprisoned when he returned to Moscow, he would be a more effective leader of the Russian opposition inside the country than permanently in exile outside the country. He seemed to be in robust health. Despite some deterioration due to solitary confinement, when he appeared on a video testifying to a Russian court from prison the day before he died as well. And he seemed to have not just good physical condition, but an excellent sense of humor, an excellent spirit to continue to lead the Russian opposition and to produce content and produce videos, even from inside jail. Navalny also was difficult, or more difficult, for Putin to criticize because he had good nationalist credentials. We may in the West not have appreciated this too much. He supported, for example, the annexation of Crimea by Putin in 2014 and standing up for the rights of ethnic Russians outside the country. But it certainly made it less easy for Putin to dismiss him as just another bourgeois intellectual from the cities with no political following. But Navalny's greatest value as an opposition leader was that he didn't campaign so much on human rights or democracy, themes that he felt, depressingly but rightly, would not really echo with the mass of Russians worried about their living conditions and keeping their heads down from a repressive regime. But he campaigned on a theme of corruption and exposing the fabulous wealth and looting of the state money by not just Putin, but other members of the elite, the fabulous mansions and villas. Um, including of not just oligarchs with their yachts, but people like Dmitry Medvedev, a former Russian prime minister and a president, thereby giving the lie to the claim that they were all selfless servants of the Russian state, living modestly and purely on their state salaries. Millions of Russians actually accessed these videos and watched them. They went viral on the social media, and Navalny's anti-corruption foundation clearly was a major embarrassment to Putin and his colleagues. Since his death, there has been, as you would imagine, a justified outburst of indignation and outrage from Western leaders. For example, just yesterday at the G20 foreign ministers in Brazil, Western leaders were asking the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, to give an explanation. He said nothing and spent most of the time looking at his emails on his mobile phone. But if we are really going to honor Navalny's name and legacy, we need more than just outrage. He has to become just as effective an opposition leader from beyond the grave in inspiring others to stand up against the regime, as he was able to do during the days when he was organizing big demonstrations and being bundled into police vans. Now, how can this be done? Well, in my view, there are four things that really are important. Number one, that the UN should carry out a formal investigation into the circumstances of his death. As long as we don't have the scientific facts credibly demonstrated, there will inevitably suspicions of malpractice here and of foul play. The UN should set up an investigative team of jurists, of medical specialists, of pathologists, and demand access to the Polar Wolf prison camp and to the morgue where his body is held, and to be able to examine that body. The UN is good, as we've seen with war crimes, with chemical weapons investigations, with putting out the facts on climate change. The UN is good at establishing the scientific facts in a credible way that nobody can dispute, and the UN Secretary General should put together that panel of investigation and demand access to Russia as soon as possible. The second thing that we need to do is to protect the surviving members of the Russian opposition, particularly from Putin's assassination squads, both inside Russia and outside Russia. The mantle of leadership will now fall to his wife, Yulia Navalnaya, who gave a moving speech after learning of his death last Saturday at the Munich Security Conference, and who was also talking to EU foreign ministers in Brussels just last Monday. She will need protection, as well as other figures such as Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the former Yukos billionaire, or Mikhail Kasanayev, the former prime minister, or Gary Kasparov, the former chess champion, who are all now in exile but still politically active. But we also, of course, have got to keep the spotlight on those brave Russians still inside the country, like Oleg Orlov, the head of Memorial, or Dmitry Muratov, the editor, newspaper editor, and Nobel Prize winner, and the cases of people like Vladimir Kara-Murza, a colleague of Navalny who has been incarcerated for 25 years. We mustn't just keep the spotlight on our own nationals. Like Evan Gerskovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who's been imprisoned in Russia on trumped-up charges, pending some kind of prisoner exchange, or on the case of Kara-Murza because he holds a British as well as a Russian passport. We must show them that they are not forgotten. The third thing is to mark Navalny through what he did most effectively, the fight against corruption. Here, the model that we can draw on are the Magnitsky Acts, named after the Russian tax accountant Sergei Magnitsky, who died in a Russian prison in 2009, denied essential medical treatment, and after exposing tax fraud on a great scale in the Russian tax authorities. The Magnitsky Acts, adopted by the US in 2012 and by the UK and many other Western countries since, keep the spotlight on money laundering, on corrupt business practices, on illegal shell companies, on tax havens like in Panama or the Cayman Islands, where Russian oligarchs try to hide their money, and on other types of human rights abuse. And we can definitely use that kind of legislation named after Navalny to continue the fight against corruption. For instance, the attempts by the US and the EU currently to confiscate Russian assets abroad, the 300 billion euros of the Russian central bank, and to channel this money to Ukraine for reconstruction. Finally, Ukraine itself. Back in 1905, 1917, 1989, during previous Russian revolutions, which did not always have a happy outcome, the Russians were able to liberate themselves and push democracy forward. They're not able to do this today, given the nature of Putin's regime, so they need outside help. And the best liberators of Russians are today Ukrainians. If Ukraine can inflict a military defeat on Russia, this will destabilize the Putin regime and open space finally for the political opposition to have a voice and to mobilize Russian society. So if you want to mark Navalny and honor his name, arm Ukraine. Thank you very much for listening today, and I look forward to engaging with you next week. Bye for now.